Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the podcast based on the Thrive Bible Reading Guide. This is the ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive's author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby, and your host, DJ Payne.
G'day and welcome to episode 60 of Thrive Deeper. It's DJ here, and on this week's episode, Matthew Jacoby and myself run through the Gospel of Matthew chapter 26. Now, chapter 26 is huge. We start off with the plot to kill Jesus. He is then anointed in Bethany. We have the story about Judas, the Last Supper Passover meal. Jesus predicts Peter's denial. He prays in Gethsemane. Jesus is betrayed and arrested. He's before the council, and Peter denies Jesus at the end of the chapter. So much to get through on this amazing episode. So I'm stoked that you're here with us. Grab your pen, grab your paper if you can. Hopefully you've had a great time going through Thrive this week, and you've got some questions and thoughts flowing through. So join us now on this week's episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew, we've got ratings. Do you know we're getting rated on this podcast? It's taken me a while, but I've actually gone out.
What do you mean ratings?
Well, in the iTunes and Apple podcast universe, you can go and rate your favorite podcast.
Oh, we're being judged.
We are. Well, we're being recommended. We're being recommended.
Right. Okay.
Well, having said that, we've had 21 ratings.
Okay.
20 of them 5 stars.
Right.
One of them 4 stars.
Oh. Okay, you can judge us. That's fine.
I want to know who that one person who gave us 4 stars is, just to bring the average down. But I want to read you, Matt, because I know you don't get across this, and I think you'd like this. From Anonymous, digging it and punning it, apparently. Loving Deeper. 5 stars. I'm only a couple of episodes in so far, but it's definitely a quality listen. The hosts are both knowledgeable and work well together. Now to find the Thrive devotional to enhance the listen. That's someone who's found us.
That's great. Very encouraging. Thank you.
Okay, so if you need the Thrive devotional, go over to the website. You know how to find it. We've got Mrs. Jarrow. I don't know who you are, Mrs. Jarrow. 5 stars. I've been a Christian for 30 years, and I've not ever had such a comprehensive teaching of the Bible. Thanks to Dr. Matthew Jacoby and DJ Payne for an interesting and easy to listen to, and sometimes humorous, podcast. Accompanying devotional, also a must. Keep up the great work.
Oh, that's great.
How good is that? 2 more. I'm going to give you 2 more because I see your
right.
head's getting a little bit big, Matt. Enjoyable, 5 stars from Marky. Matt and DJ, I absolutely love the deep discussions you guys have had and the rabbit holes you guys go down. This podcast has made me get excited to read the Bible again. All caps. Thank you so much.
That's great.
That's
great.
That's the type of review we want to hear. And then last one here, highlight. This is from Flick. Highlight, 5 stars. This podcast has become the highlight of my weekend. I'm really benefiting from the wise teaching and practical discussion. Love it, from Flick.
That's great. Thank you so much for that encouragement.
Yeah. It goes a long way.
Yeah.
It goes a long way.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to tell, and you hear me say this sometimes, if you listen all the way through to the end of the podcast, I'll often say, hey, give us a review on Apple Podcasts, because through the algorithms that Apple uses, if you recommend us and rate us 5 stars, we actually go higher in the rankings and people find us and we get recommended. So that's why I'm highlighting it there. Now, on to the actual podcast itself. Matt, we've got to get through the last 3 chapters of Matthew, of the Gospel of Matthew, over this episode and the next episode.
You'll be right.
You're looking very confident over there. There is a lot. Matthew 26, the chapter of Matthew 26 is a monster chapter. It is so big. Yep. There's so much in it. So we'll see how we go. We're going to finish it over the next 2 episodes. So I just want to do a quick recap, Matt, of where we've been over the last few weeks. Matthew 21, we see Jesus' triumphant entry, and he clears the temple and he begins this last final phase of his ministry in Jerusalem. Chapter 22, he starts giving parables and also arguments, as in, different arguments he's having with different religious leaders in Jerusalem. Chapter 23 is the 7 woes from Christ to the leaders. Chapters 24 and 25, the Olivet Discourse, 24 being about Jesus foretelling about the future of Jerusalem and the Jewish people. Chapter 25, we finished last week with parables about the end and then the final judgment, the sheep and the goats, very climactic finish there. That's where we finished last week. We start in at 26, cut straight to the chase. There's a plot to kill Jesus.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the text goes in Matthew 25 from these pictures of Jesus judging humanity, and then from 26 we go to humanity judging Jesus, and those two are related. How we judge Jesus is how we are judged. So the flow of the text here is important. It goes straight to talking about the Passover. Jesus announces is coming, and this is when I'm going to be taken in and killed. Now you've got to remember, the disciples still cannot fathom this. They just don't get this. This is not, I mean, they've heard him say this a number of times. They actually don't want to say anything, because you know what happened when Peter said something strong about this. He was rebuked very strongly. So they daren't say anything about this. So they just hold on to their confusion, I'm sure. And then we have this episode that again is seen as like a prophetic statement, foreshadowing Jesus' burial, because one of the things when someone died and is buried is that you anoint the body with perfume. And so this woman came with an alabaster jar of expensive perfume, and she poured it on his head. Perfume, in any case, was a luxury item. Remember, these are times when, people didn't have
running water.
Running water or deodorant or even soap. So most people smelled
pretty bad.
So
it was a more pungent time. So instead of, as was the customs in the Middle East and all of that region there, people would often clean themselves or keep themselves smelling okay with oil.
Yeah, that's right.
With different types of oil and perfumed oil.
Yeah, and so perfume, is something, and I think this is an amazing gesture, because this woman who has this perfume, I mean, this is the difference between, for this woman, this perfume is an opportunity to not be among the smelly masses. This is an opportunity for her to feel beautiful and to be different, to stand out of the crowd. But what does she do? She takes the perfume and she pours it over Jesus. And I think it's a beautiful gesture of her forsaking her own needs and her own desire to feel beautiful and stand out and be attractive, and actually to give that over to Jesus. Yeah. But it also then becomes this prophetic foreshadowing of Jesus' death and burial. Exactly.
And he makes it very clear. Jesus sees exactly what's going on. He makes a point of that.
That's
that this is it. So it's also, there's something very beautiful in the narrative of this, because we know that at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, or near the beginning of Jesus' ministry, I don't think it's in the book of Matthew, that Jesus is anointed with oil wasn't it on his feet at one point?
Yeah, a woman, that's in a parallel account, possibly. Well, there's a parallel account in Mark 14, but there's also this account in Luke chapter 7 and John 12. So they're
Are they all around the end time? I thought one was a bit earlier.
Yeah, well, the Luke chapter 7 one is earlier. It's hard to know with the Gospels, because they do order things slightly different in slightly different ways. But nevertheless, it's a beautiful gesture of worship. Interestingly, this then contrasts the action of this woman in honouring Jesus like this. Then contrasts what we now read about Judas.
Yeah.
And
obviously it was Judas with maybe a few of the other guys as well, but because it says the disciples were indignant. So Judas being the guy who's holding the money bag, that we find that in other
that's
parts.
right. Yeah,
he's the one saying, "Hang on, where's the money? Where's the money going for this? What a waste of money."
Yeah,
And do you reckon this was the turning point where Jesus just was dead set looking at him saying, this woman's deed will be remembered, and Judas goes out?
Yeah, Judas. Okay, well, let's talk about Judas because I think this is an interesting subject. So it says elsewhere, it talks about Satan entering Judas. But of course, the devil works through temptation and gains a foothold through temptation. So what is Judas's deal? What's going on with Judas? Well, Judas is he joins Jesus in like the other disciples, thinking he is going to become the Messiah. He's obviously. This is kind of reading between the lines, and this is speculation, but I think it's sort of educated conjecture. He's very invested in Jesus as this one that's going to, come and set himself up as the King of Israel, is going to drive out the Romans. That whole revolutionary endeavour. No doubt Judas was invested in that. So all of this business of Jesus talking about suffering and dying, Judas is either realising now that Jesus isn't the Messiah. There's a couple of possibilities here. Either he's realising, okay, he's not the Messiah then, that he's not the kind of Messiah that I am after. Yep. And maybe he did get the message. Maybe he did get the message of the donkey riding in on the donkey, or that this doesn't accord with his desires and expectations. The other possibility is that Judas wants to force things to a head. Maybe he thinks that, okay, he's going to be taken in by the chief priests, and this is the moment when this is going to be the final showdown that is going to cause Jesus to sort of reveal the fullness of his power. Yeah. He's going to destroy his enemies in one last showdown. So maybe he wants to force this showdown.
And that's what I've always read it as. And I know there's a bit of, I don't know, there's not the right word, but a sort of a romantic way of reading it, as in like you're putting a bit of a backstory for Judas. And to fast forward a little bit into the next chapter, Judas does have remorse. Like, he is filled with remorse. Yeah. It says he's filled with remorse when he realizes that his little plan, this is me assuming that this is his motivation. Yeah. Jesus is going to die. He knows, right, Jesus has been saying he's going to die. This is what it is. Oh, no, I've done the wrong thing.
Yeah, and I think that's why this sort of schema, that way of understanding it, just makes a bit of sense with this story because, I mean, look, one possibility is that he realises Jesus isn't the Messiah. He's followed him all this time and now he just wants to get out of it what he can.
He can make some money.
Yeah, and he's going to make some money.
And we've already heard that he likes the money. He's the treasurer.
Yeah, so that is a possibility, and that's an option that some commentaries present. But then why is he immediately so broken over the result of the verdict against Jesus, of the Sanhedrin? And I think to me it would make more sense to see that response as a response to the fact that things didn't go the way that he thought, that perhaps he thought this would be the big showdown. I mean, maybe it's a bit of both.
Yeah. And also, without getting all, spooky movie about it. Yeah. I mean, the Bible makes it clear that he was demonized by, if not the very, very, very Satan himself. Like, he was demonized, and this was his motivations were brought along by the enemy. At a certain point, once those deeds are done, and he comes to his right senses out of that, he would be totally of a shell of a person. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, maybe it's handy because the text comes back to Judas at a couple of points. Maybe it'd be good to just say a few things about Judas so that we can have that seal. Because one of the things that's interesting is the fact that, remember, there are kind of two people in this story. Well, everyone turns away from Jesus in the end, but Peter is, in some senses, as bad. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't betray Jesus for money, but he adamantly denies even knowing Jesus, right? So what's the difference between Peter and Judas in this narrative? Well, Judas is committed to this revolutionary agenda. I mean, there's no grace in that revolutionary agenda. It's an agenda of judgment, right? We're going to rise up against the Romans. We're going to be the instruments of God's judgment.
Yep.
And he's committed to that. Now, when you live in this space of judgment, then when suddenly you realise that you are the condemned one, there's no hope. I think the difference with Peter is that he is, yes, he makes this terrible mistake. He denies Jesus. But the reason why he doesn't despair and commit suicide like Judas does is that he gets enough of the grace thing. You know what I mean? He can grasp the, and actually Peter experiences this
later.
Yeah, this amazing element of grace and transformation. And Jesus, in fact, preempts that.
Yeah.
You know, Satan has asked to sift you of wheat, but I've prayed for you. And so there is this kind of there's this lifeline of grace that he is able to take hold of that Judas is just not within Judas's field of vision.
Yeah, I mean, and that's looking at it from a very
we're
looking at it from a very earthly sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it in other verses in the Bible about Judas, it's like, no, God predestined him to be this role,
right,
and God predestined.
That's right.
And it's like, whoa,
and you can look at things from both.
Yes.
From both those angles. So there is a sense, because Jesus declares a woe on the one who betrays the Son of Man.
Yeah.
So there's a sense in which his fate was sealed, but the way that God's sovereignty works is never to exclude human agency and the human right to self-determination from that earthly point of view. I mean, God ultimately is sovereign, but it also takes into consideration the decisions that we make. So, look, it's just interesting because there are these perspectives around Judas, and
the other thing to point out that really blew me away. I remember, growing up on these Bible stories, and when I started really studying it for myself, I realised, and through different concordances and different teachings like that, Judas was really close to Jesus. Judas is mentioned a lot, not just because of the because of that, but he was close. And even in someone outlaying and like drawing and looking at how the Last Supper would have worked and how they were, they didn't sit at a table like we see in paintings or anything. They were lying down as in the custom. For Jesus to be able to pass the bread to someone right next to him.
Yeah.
I remember someone preaching once and saying Judas would have been on Jesus's right-hand side, type of thing. Yeah. Judas was right there next to him. Yeah. And for Jesus to be able to whisper to him, go, do what you have to do. And everyone's going, what's happening? They didn't hear it. Yeah. It's because he was so close.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a bit of a hubbub and people are talking and it's a dinner. And
that's sort of, because I grew up imagining like Dick Dastardly twirling a mustache in the corner all the time.
No, that's right.
But no, he was right there, trusted with the money, trusted to look after everybody, passionately wanting Jesus to rise up to his expectations.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't happen, it's just
that's right.
A destruction, a road to destruction.
Yeah. It says, I don't know if people have noticed this it says that he hanged himself in 27 verse 5. And yet in Acts 1:18, it says, with the payment he received for his wickedness, Judas bought a field, and there he fell headlong. His body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. Thank you very much.
Beautiful Acts. Thank you.
Yeah, everyone in Jerusalem heard about this, so they called the field in their language
Field of Blood.
That is the field of blood.
And I've heard people trot this out as, see, contradictions. Your Bible's a contradiction here.
Yeah, it's probably, look, with the kind of ropes, I mean, I think he was probably discovered on the ground having the rope having dropped and that's the way that he, So I don't think that's a difficult, just in case anyone noticed that. Now, the other interesting thing is that's I think worth a mention is the 30 pieces of silver.
Yeah.
This, in Exodus 21, this is the price to be paid to the owner of a slave gored by an ox. So it's, I mean, we don't want to say too much about Exodus and the allowance for slavery as a part of because in the biblical law, slaves were to be treated far better than they were, anyway.
Than what we think of slaves.
Than what we think of slaves.
Yeah.
So it was certainly this is not a point at which to comment on slavery, but the point is that it's like the price of a slave in a sense, and I think that 30 pieces of silver is significant as betrayal money. He's selling him as he were, and I think Joseph was sold by his brothers for I think less than that, about 20 shekels he was sold for. So it's more than this, but it's still there's still this association with this price of a slave, and being sold into slavery. Yeah. And this is, the connection actually with Joseph here is important because there is this narrative patterning between what happens to Jesus and Joseph, because the Joseph story, Genesis preempts all of the themes in the rest of the Bible in the book of Genesis, and the Joseph narrative preempts this idea of Jesus being sold. Joseph gets sold over
and innocent. God's
Gentiles,
chosen,
and then is able to fulfill through that. Is able to fulfill the Abrahamic covenant, which is, I will bless you and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. So this kind of happens in a penultimate sense with Joseph, but ultimately with Jesus. And what Joseph says to his brothers in, I think it's Genesis 50, where he says, what you meant for evil, God has used for good. Exactly the same thing happens here. So Jesus is sold as a slave in a sense, with this price of a slave he's given over to the authorities, but ultimately is handed over to the Gentiles. But by his brothers, right? He's sold by his brothers, and yet what they meant for evil, God has used for good. So just the narrative patterning there, I think, is really profound.
Definitely. So we're in the Last Supper. We're in the Last Supper, and Jesus is again foretelling my time has come. I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. Judas, says, I'm the one, aren't I? And it's almost, you could almost hear Judas going, all right, he's down with the plan. He knows what's going on.
Yep.
He keeps telling me that one of us is going to betray me. I'm going to do it. It's time to go. And off he goes to do it. And then, they have the Last Supper.
I wonder if he's thinking, Jesus is down with my plan.
That's what I've thought. That's what I've sort of come to. I know it's a bit romantic and a bit movie type of thing, but I just...
Yeah.
It's one of those things. This is the lesson for me again, reading Judas, yet again, and it's a pattern that we've talked about often and often again, is that idea of coming to God with your own expectations about what he has to do for you, or how it has to be fair, how you expect things to go, and he's going to thwart it. And if you stay headlong, and Judas is the ultimate example, if you headlong will not shake what you believe God is going to do, you're going to force a situation, ultimately you will come completely undone.
Yeah, it's like that proverb or saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And I think the commitment of these people, and particularly Judas, to his particular plan, and as we've said, that was the case with all the disciples, but Judas is just on this... is just fixated by this, and so he leaves the supper, and it goes on without him, which is interesting. That they have this moment of instituting the new covenant. Judas is absent.
Yes.
This is, they're celebrating the Passover. This is an incredibly poignant moment, the Last Supper, because they are celebrating the Passover, which is looking back to the Exodus and celebrating the Exodus. But now it becomes this moment, this turning point moment, this sort of what you would call a chiastic moment, where
break that word down for us.
It's like a chi is a letter, like an X.
Okay.
Where the narrative comes down to this moment, this pinpoint moment,
and then
and something else comes out the other side. So it's this Passover is celebrating something in the past, but now it's also opening something for
Could
the
you
future.
tell me if this is a bad word picture with the I was just watching your hand motions there. I'm trying to explain it to everybody. The Pink Floyd album where you have a prism of light, you have a glass prism, a white beam comes onto it, and then out of that white beam, now the white beam in this analogy would be the tradition of the Passover Exodus. Jesus is the prism of light, and then out of that one thing becomes bang, a rainbow that is the new covenant.
That's a good picture. I'm glad you could fit Pink Floyd in there.
I'll
I was a
repent.
big Pink Floyd fan when I was a teenager in the 80s.
I won't hold that against you.
That's right. That's right. Look up if you don't know what we're talking about. You can Google Pink Floyd.
I'll put a link to that. I can't believe we're going to put a link to that album cover in the show notes. So getting back to it, Jesus.
That's right.
Jesus is setting up the new covenant. Yep. This is what we remember now when we have our a lot of traditions will call it communion. Eastern Orthodox and Catholic churches will call it a lot of different names, different things like that. With the Eucharist and having different memorial about that. So he sets that up now really, really quickly, and I think we're going to have to really touch on this very briefly. I'm amazed. I was chatting to a young Catholic guy not long ago, and I'm trying to get in contact with him. He's just he's incredibly young. 18 years old. In the and he's heading into the priesthood. He's studying now. He's one of this batch, and I've met some of his classmates and seen photos and videos of their classmates from around the world. These 18 and 19-year-old young men who are zealous for God. I am blown away about their passion, their knowledge, and everything of the Bible. The first point of discussion with me when they find out that I, know the scriptures, in their words, and am passionate about God, first thing they point up is the the body of Christ.
Oh, right. Okay.
In communion.
Yeah. I could understand that. Yeah.
And I was amazed that was the first point of contention between us.
Yeah.
And again, to explain that, they believe in the doctrine of
transubstantiation, where the elements change into the body and blood of Jesus. Now, it's complicated, the sense in which they think that.
Yes.
And so the actual offering of the Mass, that's why in Catholic churches you have the altar there, because there's a sense that Jesus is being offered up again, that there is this atonement thing happening right there and then as the bread is broken and the wine is presented. This is a sacrifice being presented on the altar and then communicated to the people. So that's the theology of the Catholic Mass. Of course, I think it's important in understanding other traditions. Protestants, and I mean this goes on both sides of the arguments, but we're very good at forming a caricature of what the other side believes and then rejecting the caricature. I think it's really important that we understand why they think that. But now I'm not going to talk to that now. I just put that in there as a footnote.
Yeah.
What can tend to happen though in the Protestant tradition, particularly in the evangelical tradition, I think we pendulum swing way too far.
Yeah.
We treat the Lord because this what Jesus says here, I think, becomes a key. In fact, the context of this being instituted in the light of the Passover, there's this connection between the Lord's Supper and the Passover.
Yes.
So I think that's a key to understanding the significance of the Lord's Supper. Now, in a lot of evangelical traditions, the Lord's Supper, it's just a tool to remember.
Yep.
It's like a statue or a. Now, I think we need to treat it as more than that. Similar to baptism. I mean, we think there's a real. We don't think that baptism makes you a Christian, but we do think it's something that it's a mechanism that you use to declare something about your commitment to God, and through baptism, God genuinely declares His commitment to us. Through that symbol. Well, the Passover celebration of the Passover wasn't just a remembrance in our sense. Well, actually, when Hebrew people thought about remembering something, it wasn't just, remember that and remember this. It wasn't just this intellectual remembering. It was a covenant reconfirmation ceremony. that's really important. It was them reconfirming their covenant with God, reconnecting with their covenant with God. It was a mechanism for recommitment.
Yes.
So like signing on the, signing on the dotted, we formally recommit.
Yeah.
This is why, Paul, when he discusses this in 1 Corinthians 11, he says this is a really serious thing, and you need to make sure that you do this in a worthy manner, that you understand what you're doing, because, and if it's just a remembrance, then why? What's the big deal? But it's not just remembering in the intellectual sense. It's actually, you're signing on the dotted line here. I mean, you are. It's actually a covenant reconfirmation thing that's going on here. So when we celebrate the Lord's Supper, however we do that, we're actually it's using those symbols. We are reconfirming our commitment to God, and through those symbols, He is reconfirming His commitment with us.
Yeah, it's a two-way
That's right,
process. Yeah. I love it. It's almost, tell me if I've got it wrong. Again, I'm going to use one of my word pictures here, but as you were talking there, I thought, what covenant or commitments I've made in my life. There hasn't been many.
Yeah.
One of the most important ones is to my wife, type of thing. And every now and then a photo might pop up on Facebook to say, remember this, remember that year ago or whatever. And you go, whatever, and you move on. But every now and then on an anniversary, we might go away together or have a date.
Yeah.
And you actually spend time.
Yeah.
And you really remember together.
Yeah.
And you talk together and you remember how important, and you almost recommit yourselves in that moment of remembering what it was all about. Yeah. Communion maybe is something.
Well, it's a bit more. It's even a bit more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say it's
a lot more.
It's more than just remembering. It's a formal act of reconfirmation. It's like I'm recommitting myself.
Okay.
That's the important thing about it. Again, how we do it is less important. This is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
That actually, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole because I just realised how much we're going to get through.
Okay.
But that in any case is the significance of communion, the Lord's Supper, Eucharist, however you want to put that, and it's important, I think, that we connect with the fullness of that meaning.
DJ here to interrupt you for just one moment. I hope you're enjoying the discussion between Matthew and myself about chapter 26 of the Gospel of Matthew. Oh boy, it's been an emotional roller coaster. But talking about emotional roller coasters, God has given us a guidebook. And it's the book of Psalms. And I've already told you how much Dr. Matthew Jacoby, your friend and mine, has spent his life devoted to the Psalms, and that's why he's written the book Deeper Places, and we're proud to announce not only a revised edition with a whole new chapter in it, but an amazing set of videos that we have just finished editing. And the videos go through the chapters of the book, and it's for small group or personal study where Matthew gives you extra information and pulls out some content and draws you in closer about those deeper places with God. Now, I might be biased about this, but I got so much out of editing these videos of Matthew going through the book that I know that you're going to get something out of it as well. As I speak, the videos have been exported. We are just waiting to match up the sounds, and hopefully by the time you hear this, they're available. To sign up and to get the videos, head over to thrivetoday.net.au. That's our home on the web. If you head over there and you want to sign up just to be notified when they're out, it's really simple to do. Give us your email address at thrivetoday.net.au. All right, let's get back into the podcast. It's DJ here with Matt Jacoby, and thank you so much for tuning in to Thrive Deeper. We're in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26, and Matt, we have got a long way to get through. This is the last couple of episodes we're doing on the Gospel of Matthew, and we're at the point now where at the Last Supper, they have finished. Jesus has set up this new covenant, explained what is happening on top of the Passover. And then he turns to Peter.
Yeah.
And we get...
Gee, Peter must have been shocked he says you're all going to... he says in verse 31, that this very night you will all fall away on account of me, for this is written, I'll strike the shepherd. The sheep of the flock will be scattered. That's from Zechariah 13. And Peter says, Peter just can't conceive of this. Peter thinks that he's the most dedicated, committed guy on earth. And this is... he's going to have this moment of realising that he's not nearly as committed as he thinks he is. Oh. And Jesus is okay with him having that experience. Like, Jesus knows this about him.
Yeah.
And because Jesus knows this about him, it's really important that Peter realises that as well. And this is an important realisation. Sometimes we need to realise our lack of commitment. Like, we need to recognise that we're not nearly as committed as we think we are.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm pretty committed, but it's really healthy for me to realise where the autonomy and the self-dependence and all of these things have become habitual again. So it's this thing of allowing ourselves to see the worst in ourselves.
Yeah.
And
even how we justify the worst.
That's right.
Because again, we're going to get into it, but at those points that Peter does betray Christ.
Yeah.
There's often he would be like, no, this is not what Jesus did. Like, he would just
deny Christ. He didn't.
Yeah, sorry, not betray. Sorry, deny.
Yeah.
And so when he gets to those points, the justification until that he comes home. Oh, such a powerful picture.
And Jesus says to him, before this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And Peter says, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you.
And all the
other disciples says the same.
Me too.
And he does
Peter.
explicitly that.
Yeah.
He explicitly disowns Jesus. But the thing is that he experiences grace. This is the thing about Peter. Like, he sees the worst in himself. He sees what he's capable of. He is restored after, he is restored and given grace. And then actually Peter does give his life in the end.
And ultimately, as Jesus had already alluded to with other disciples, promising their very lives on it, Jesus was like, your time will come.
Yeah.
And I think there's an echo in this for all of the disciples here, vowing, no, we're never going to die, we're going to die.
Yeah. And according to tradition, Peter was crucified as well.
Yeah.
So he, of all of the deaths of the disciples, his most resembles Jesus. And in fact, tradition has it that when they went to crucify him, he asked to be crucified upside down because he didn't want to. He didn't want to take that. Or whatever.
Some sort of sacrilegious or something. Yeah, I didn't want to do it like that. Oh boy. Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind because that's going to come up again. And now we get into the Garden of Gethsemane. And, we get this, again, it's like the curtain. This is an amazing time. This is like heaven on earth. The curtain is pulled back from, the things that we think are reality. And we see, Jesus in relationship as God, as man, pouring out his heart to his Father. It is amazing.
Yeah. Now, the language here is important because he says... in verse 39, it says, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but that you will. And then he comes back, and in verse 42, it says, he went away a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. So I want us just to think about this. If it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. Now, what is he talking about? What cup is he talking about? Well, let me read you a couple of scriptures because this symbol, like a lot of symbols, carries right through Scripture, this symbol of the cup.
Cup of suffering.
Yeah. Well, it's actually more than that. It's a cup of judgment, actually.
Okay.
And throughout, in the prophets in Isaiah and Jeremiah, there is this picture that is used to describe how judgment works because the issue for the people of God in Old Testament times is that there's all this evil out in the world, but God doesn't seem to be doing anything. Why isn't God judging evildoers? That was the big issue that they had. So through Jeremiah and Isaiah, God says, no, I am going to, all of the judgment is being stored up in this cup, right? And that and in fact, it talks about, even in relation to God's people, Israel, that there's this sense of the cup. Let me read to you, because I think this is really significant.
Great.
In Jeremiah 25, from verse 15, it says, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me. Take from my hand this cup filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. When they drink it, they will stagger and go mad because of the sword I will send among them." Verse 17, "So I took the cup from the Lord's hand and made all the nations to whom he sent me drink it." This is, a picture of the sort of the last judgment. And then it goes on, "Jerusalem and the towns of Judah, its kings and officials, to make them a ruin and an object of horror and a scorn and a curse as they are today. Pharaoh, king of Egypt." So it's talking about all of the nations, including God's people, right?
Yes.
And so it's the shock of this chapter is that, Judah is being lumped in with all of these other nations. And there's this picture of judgment, right?
Yeah.
Stored up in this cup,
Yeah.
and that one day they're going to have to drink from that cup. And it goes on, "Tell them," in verse 27, "this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Drink, get drunk, and vomit, and fall and rise no more because of the sword I will send among you. But if they refuse to take the cup from your hand and drink, tell them, this is what the Lord Almighty says. You must drink it. See, I'm about to bring disaster on the city that bears mine." And so it goes on. So this is the background to this idea. When Jesus says, when he's talking about this cup, right, he's talking about the judgment that had been foreshadowed there by Jeremiah. And he's saying, let this cup be taken away, this cup that we all deserve. But if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, then let your will be done. Well, it was not possible, clearly, for that cup to be taken away unless Jesus drank it. This is a really key and central bit of theology here, that it was necessary. See, we might ask the question, why can't God just forgive people? Why does Jesus have to suffer and die? Well, it's because God is just. God can't be, yes, God can do anything, but God cannot be other than who God is. And justice is an aspect of who God is. It's an essential attribute of God. So God can't just sweep justice aside. What God does is that he fulfills justice. Yeah. So this cup, according to the principle of sowing and reaping, we have to reap what we sow. But the good news is that Jesus took the cup. Jesus reaped what we sowed. He took the cup on our behalf. That's what's happening here.
And it's like a fulfillment of that promise. I mean, God's not going to make a promise to the people and a promise to himself about this cup.
That's right.
And that's amazing. It's a cup of judgment, but Jesus in that first prayer calls it his cup of suffering.
Yeah.
Like it's the judgment, it's the right judgment, but I've got to suffer through it.
But he's taking it. So
it's amazing.
He is willing to take this. And this is this is his anguish here. This is the anguish, because he is about to take the cup described by Jeremiah, and he is about to drink the fullness of this. So this isn't just a matter of his consciousness of the fact that he's going to suffer physically. There's actually something way worse here, and this is the fact that he is actually going to bear the just anger of God against the sins of the world on our behalf. This is what he's about to do.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Again, and the other part of it, the opening gambit of this whole bit is him telling his very closest friends, my soul is crushed with grief within me.
Yeah.
Just wait.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And this is in Isaiah 51, again using this imagery from Isaiah 51 from verse 21 says, "Therefore hear this, you afflicted one, made drunk but not with wine. This is what your sovereign Lord says, your God who defends his people. See, I have taken out of your hand the cup that made you stagger. From that cup, the goblet of my wrath, you will never drink again." And so, again, how is this the case? It's because Jesus would take this cup.
This is fundamentally, the cornerstone and the bedrock of what the gospel is, and what, why we do what we do. All right, look. We could just camp out here for the rest. We've got to fly through. Right from there, Jesus is betrayed. Judas comes in, with the leading priests and the elders, and he's given the sign of the kiss. Judas just walks straight up to him, greetings, Rabbi, greetings, teacher, and gives him a kiss. And, and Jesus says, my friend.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the kiss is, it's sort of tragically ironic, isn't it? Because it was a sign of brotherhood. And yet this becomes the identifier. Now, by the way, the reason why, why couldn't they just take Jesus? Why did it require Judas to betray Jesus for them to get hold of Jesus? Yeah. Well, Jesus had a big following. They had observed this. And so they need to do this in an underhanded way. They can't go out and take him with all the crowds around him. And it's very difficult to get Jesus without the crowds. And so they need to find the right time. They need an insider to know when is the right place and the right time to actually nab Jesus, so that there won't be this uprising against the Jewish leaders.
And I'm also thinking in that the religious Jewish people of the time, in some way they would say, well, it's not their fault. Yeah. They're now passing off that blame. That sin is now Judas's. Yeah. So they're somehow away from that.
That's right. And look, it's and at this point too, it's dark.
Yes.
We're not in a park here with lampstands.
Yeah. And obviously, it was so unique. I mean, it's such a tight brotherhood thing to kiss. Yeah. To kiss someone. Judas isn't walking in and everyone's coming for a kiss from him. Yeah. He's like, no, I'll just wait. I'll go to Jesus and kiss him. Because that's something that he knew that he had that relationship with him. He was that close with him. Yeah. So they grab him. We see the bit there with the sword, the old sword. Now we know from other passages that's Peter.
Yeah, that's Peter. And again here, this is just yet another indication that they don't get it right. Oh, so this is the start of the fight.
Yeah.
It's like, no, there's no fight. We're not fighting.
I've got my sword ready.
Yeah, that's right.
I've had it up my sleeve the whole time.
Yeah, and Jesus' response, put your sword back in its place. Yeah. And it says, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. I mean, that statement alone is so important because, the Jewish people are going to, in the 60s, within this generation, are going to rise up against the Romans, are going to take up the sword, and they are going to fall at the point of the sword. So again, this is very much a prophetic statement. And, Jesus says to them in verse 55, it says here, Jesus said to the soldiers, to the crowd of soldiers, am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Well, that's exactly what he hadn't been. Yeah. That's exactly what he isn't doing. Yeah. And yet they're treating him like he is.
Yeah. And even Peter is thinking in that way. Yeah. And that final bit in that verse verse 56, at the end, where he prophesies about the fulfillment of scriptures, and at that point, all the disciples deserted him and fled.
Yeah, that's right.
Bang. He's by himself here from now on.
Yeah.
We move on. Jesus is before the council. We get a snapshot of Jesus before the council. And this is the council of high priests, Caiaphas and the high priest there.
Yeah, well, the Sanhedrin is broader than that. It's Pharisees and Sadducees. So the Pharisees are sort of the rabbis, the teachers. And then you've also got the priestly class there. So you've got this mixture of people that are basically this is the ruling court. Presided over by the high priest. These guys make the local decisions, but they are limited. There are certain decisions that they can't make. One of the things they're not allowed to do is condemn. They're not allowed to condemn anyone to death without Roman.
Yep.
Only Rome is able to sign off on that and really do that. So if they are going to implicate Jesus and execute Jesus, they're going to need to hand him over to the Romans. But the interesting thing about the trial of Jesus is the way that it clearly shows because what's going to happen from this point on is that there's this polarization effect. People are going to be polarized now, and this Matthew wants to show here that Jesus was condemned and given over by his brothers in a way that was no way justified.
Okay.
and he wants to.
And by brothers, you mean the Jewish people?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
And so he wants to, and this is, it's a countercultural point, but we need to understand why Matthew is doing this. He is going to highlight the enormity of what they actually did. That he wants to implicate his brothers, the Jewish people, in this. But here's the thing: he's not an anti-Semitic, of course, because Matthew or Levi, who's writing this, is a Jew. He wants his own people to realize what they did, so that they can find grace. So this is about helping his people. Matthew, as the gospel writer, wants his Jewish readers to take responsibility for what was done, to find grace. And so what you see in the suffering and death narrative that Matthew brings is there is this theme of the absolute responsibility of his brothers for doing what they did. This is emphasised actually when we get over into the when Pilate brings, and we'll say something about that in a moment, with this decision between Jesus and Barabbas and the way that unfolds. But we'll say something about that in a moment.
So to cut a very long story short, and depending on how you look at it, of course, for us today, we look at this in this trial as a bit of a, just a facade. It's a mock trial. They've set it all up themselves. They've got everything. They've been rehearsing this. They know what's going to happen. But then Jesus, he doesn't. This is the fascinating part. He goes headlong into it. And when they finally get him to say something, he says in verse 64, "You've said it.
Yeah.
I am the Messiah. And in the future, you'll see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven." Boom.
Yeah.
He signed, that's him signing his own death warrant with
that's
him.
right.
And you can see the high priest, they're tearing their clothes. They're putting on the horror, the show blasphemy. We don't have to hear anymore. He's worthy of death.
Yeah, and yet they had seen this demonstrated. This is not just a random guy coming out of the blue and saying, "Hey, this is who I am."
Yes.
He had fulfilled every scripture. He had demonstrated the power of God. He had more than backed up his point. So his own life had borne witness to this. Yet they are, in the meantime, getting these false witnesses to talk about.
It's almost like he's almost like Jesus is saying, "Cut the charade. Let me just help you here.
Yeah.
You're embarrassing yourselves."
How the false witnesses twist his word. He said that he would destroy the temple. And, so they're really looking for a reason to get rid of this guy. Yeah. It's very tragic.
And it gets gruesome pretty quickly.
Yeah, it gets gruesome very quickly. And you look, in the meantime, because then after that it talks about out in the courtyard, Peter is the only one he's keeping an eye on things. But, he is realising now the reality of this situation and what Jesus is up for. Yeah. And you get this little bit about him denying Jesus and adamantly in the end, calling down curses and vowing that he does not know the man. I do not know this man. Oh. And at that moment, it says that the rooster crows and he just weeps bitterly. And then after that, you have Judas going out and hanging himself.
Again, it's that same narrative. It's the part of the narrative early in the chapter. We're going to put Judas here and Peter here.
That's right.
We're going to put them next to each other because they're both really important. Yeah. And I personally believe they were both very close to Christ and how they respond out of this.
And in a sense, the interesting thing is that point that they're not. There's not a good guy and a bad guy. They're both the bad guys. Yeah, but one finds grace and is restored. That's the key to this.
And I just love that picture because at the beginning, when Jesus is taken in the courts there into the system there, we see right at the beginning that Peter followed at a distance, seeing how it ended. He gets in, he slips in. He's the only one of the disciples that slips in. And he's watching all of this goes on, and as he goes on, he can see what's happening. Yeah, and you can feel Peter's heart just falling out of the bottom of him. Yeah, going, that's right. This is not what we thought was going to happen.
Oh, he would have been devastated.
But
absolutely devastated. There's nothing more devastating than the things the bad things that people do to us are the things that we see coming from ourselves. Yeah. That will devastate you far more. And Peter has that experience.
Do you think, and we're going to close off with this, Pat, we've run out of time, but so we've, finishing here the chapter with, this part of Peter and Jesus. I personally believe for me, in my walk, not just once or twice, but multitude of times I have those Peter moments where the cock crows in something and I go, oh my goodness, I said I would never do this.
Yeah.
How important is that in our walk?
That is very important in our walk. And in fact, the interesting thing is God puts us in situations even to allow us to realise that we're not nearly as committed as we are, but also to allow us to realise and see the worst in ourselves. And these are situations. It's interesting what happens when we get put in these situations, these Peter situations where we mouth off or we strike back at someone or whatever it is, we see the worst come out in ourselves. What we tend to do is blame the situation. We tend to try to escape the situation. We condemn the situation. This situation is terrible, and really what's terrible is that we are in a terrible state. and the situation is just bringing that out, but we have this tendency to blame the situation on that. No, actually, God puts us in situations too, and I would put it this way, that press on the sore spots of our lives, that bring the infection to the surface. And we need to watch out for this because this is an important part of God getting our attention and moving us forwards. And so we need to embrace these moments and allow these moments to lead us back to God with a broken spirit and a contrite heart. Because that moment of brokenness when you realise, like Peter, when you realise actually how bad you are, how poorly a state that you are in, that actually is the doorway to renewal. Right there, that's the doorway to renewal. It's like this is what the message right at the beginning of the gospel, John the Baptist, where does he lead the people to? To encounter God who's going to come to them in Jesus Christ. He leads them to the place of repentance. What we see here in Peter is that Peter is led to the place of repentance. Like this is Peter experiencing real contrition. He is weeping, and this is the turning point for Peter. The Peter that we read about in the book of Acts is a completely different Peter. We have people just trying to be touched by his shadow, because the power of God that is at work through this man. We see a completely different Peter in this amazing man in the book of Acts. What happened? This happened. Peter had this moment of breakdown, of being completely broken down, and this is the doorway to the next stage in people's lives. I would say to you that you need to allow God to show you the worst in yourself, to lead you to that place of brokenness, what Psalm 51 calls the broken spirit and a contrite heart. That will be the doorway to renewal in your life.
There's a theme for you, the doorway to renewal in your life. Oh, wow. So much there in Matthew 26. Well, on next week's episode, we got to fly through the last couple of chapters of Matthew. And I just want to say thank you to everyone that's been in contact with us over the last couple of weeks. It is great to hear from you. And as you heard from the beginning of the podcast, get out there and review and rate the podcast over in Apple iTunes. 5 stars, please. It goes a long way, trust me. You can write to us as well from thrivetoday.net.au. It's great hearing from you. I'm going to put it out there. The people that listen all the way to the end to this spot here, I want you to get back to me. I want you to get in touch with me and let me know you listen all the way to the end. Very, very disheartened this week to find out there's a lot of people that don't listen all the way to the end, but you know what? I can take it. Until next week, it's DJ for Thrive Deeper.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew and DJ would love to hear your questions and comments about what you are reading in God's Word and in Thrive. The easiest way to do that is to head over to thrivetoday.net.au. Thrive Deeper is on Facebook. Just search and like Thrive Today page for all our latest news. Until next week, our prayer is that this podcast will inspire you to read God's Word and thrive.